Wir haben als Gast, and I'll switch to English now, Francesca Bria. She's leading the Italian National Fund for Innovation in the board overall. She's honorary professor for the University College of London. She's an innovation economist. She has broad experience across the whole spectrum of data strategy, data innovation, and sharing economies and sharing data. And her main project is the European data sovereignty of the citizens over their own data. So please join me in welcoming Francesca from Rome. So we take. Oh, that's pretty cozy. You said your mission is to give back the data to the citizens. What exactly do you mean in saying so?
Thank you for the question. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you in Frankfurt today. Yes, so one big topic during my work, both at the European Commission, so maybe I say a little bit what I'm doing at the moment. It is I'm leading the Italian National Innovation Fund, and I'm also a professor at UCL Innovation for Public Innovation Institute in London. And then I'm also advising President von der Leyen on her strategy for the Green Deal and the new European Bauhaus, and I've been many years involved as an advisor to the European Commission on digital innovation. And previously, 4 years ago, I used to run the Smart City and Digital Innovation Strategy of the city of Barcelona. So I was the Chief Technology and Digital Innovation Officer. And during my work in Barcelona, we understood how important the question of data sovereignty and data control, let's say putting trust at the center of the digital transformation, of the digitization process was going to be, and that cities were going to be critical place where this kind of new relationship between citizens, consumers, and technology, and between public sector and private sector was going to play out. Because you could see in cities, of course, I mean, we know all the trends about big urbanization processes today. 50% of the population is today living in cities, and it's going to be higher very soon. And the question, of course, the big trends that are happening when it comes to digitization and technology transformation are hitting cities, from real estate transformation to mobility transformation to the question of climate change, of course, and the imperative towards decarbonization. So changing mobility, changing the way citizens understand this transformation, so the way citizens adopt technology. So we decided to put this question of data sovereignty at the center of the digital strategy of Barcelona. And we came up with an idea that was, today we have, let's say, two models for the future of digital. One is the big tech companies owning more and more of the digital assets and the data. And so you see a lot of smart cities projects that are about, Google or Amazon or Microsoft, the big tech companies, but also the Chinese tech companies coming into the city and owning the cloud and the digital infrastructures and the data. And we saw a big pushback from the citizens towards this model because all of a sudden, you feel that you have no more control over your life, the way the citizen is digitizing, and you need you want a more democratic digital city. So you want to have a say, you want these systems to be more accountable, to be more transparent. And so we put forward a process, let's say a model of democratization of data. And we developed a project that was called Decode, was funded by the European Commission, was a flagship project. It was one of the first projects that the European Commission funded for data sovereignty, and we developed a large-scale distributed data infrastructures based on distributed ledger technology, but that was like 6 years ago. So it wasn't so popular. The blockchain and distributed ledger technology and cryptography wasn't something, you know, so popular as it became today. And then basically we bet for a model where citizens can control their own data, and so they can decide what data they want to keep private using strong cryptography and making sure we do a lot of, you know, training and education about cryptography, both in the public sector, of course, but also for citizens, what it means to use cryptography. And then citizens, they can decide what data they want to share, with whom, and on what terms. And that's what we defined a new deal on data, like a new social pact on data, which basically entails data transparency and a new type of agreements on who is owning the data, how you can share it, and on what terms. So moving away from this kind of data oligopoly, let's say, towards a more decentralized model for data sharing, but with rules that are clear, that are accountable. So more openness, but also more control of the data. And now, you know, I'm talking about concepts that are pretty clear today because they are actually really at the core of the new digital strategy of the European Commission, of the new Data Act, the new Data Governance Act, the new Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a big package of rules that Europe is putting forward as its own innovation and digital agenda. But a few years ago, there were no politicians around there saying we need to put forward a digital strategy that has data sovereignty at the core, and we need to, you know, also reclaim a new data deal, like a new governance model for data. And so we have pioneered that. And it's very tangible, so it maybe sounds a bit technical, you know, like cryptography, the blockchain, distributed architecture, and so on, but it's very tangible because in cities, when you think about data, you're actually thinking about very tangible infrastructures, you know, how you manage mobility, how you decarbonize the city and lower CO2 emissions, so how you manage energy consumption, how do you, you know, replan the city, so the kind of planning rules and the planning environment, you know, water management. So it's really about rethinking urban transformation, rethinking public spaces and urban spaces, and using data and technology as a fundamental infrastructure for that, but also govern them in a democratic way. So govern them in a more transparent and democratic way.
I think we've learned in the past years that scale is one of the main issues in the whole digitization of data and making that usable, and also investing a lot of time and effort and money into making it profitable. How do you create the scale when you're looking at a single city?
Well, cities are already a scale where you can experiment a lot when it comes to innovation, and that's why, you know, I think we need to scale more than a city at city level. Actually, we need, I mean, cities are also very important because they act as a kind of global diplomacy network. So you see a lot of cities, for example, collaborating on new mobility, sharing mobility platforms, collaborating on new, you know, on new agreements for how do we regulate the short home rent market, for example. Cities are able to share services at a kind of, you know, European and global scale. So I think first of all, when it comes to innovation, you want to have sandbox experimentation. So you want to bring, you know, the innovators, the startups, the small companies, use the city infrastructure as a test bed or as a city lab, yes, and then have the innovation and possibly scale that innovation first at city scale and then also globally. But I think like one point that is very important, I think, for me to take away, you cannot really just digitize everything without putting democratic control and trust at the very center, because we are seeing a very strong backlash towards this kind of systems. I mean, it's really important to understand that citizens at this point, they have a lot of agency. They want to, to have a say, to participate, and also they want the process to be pretty transparent in the decision making.
Yeah.
For example, when I was the CTO of Barcelona, we pioneered a large-scale participatory democracy process where we brought 400,000 citizens in the decision-making process about the future of the city, how you shape the future of the city. And I think that this can be also very important here to maybe lead this kind of wave of citizens' participation. So not be afraid of the citizens that want to have more of a say, more access, more transparency, and more participation, but try to lead that way, because otherwise we're going to face another wave of populism that is really the problem that we have in the kind of policy-making space.
Yeah, we do have that a lot in the planning space, and I think I'll come back to that later on, but let me ask one more question about scale. How far are you in terms of scaling it? You've implemented it in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Where are you now? Are there any other cities joining you?
So in Barcelona, let's say the two big things were this kind of data sovereignty system at a city scale, like the Decode project, but also the large-scale citizen participation model. So regarding the first one, how do you use data? How do you use, let's say, data sharing agreements, data trust? How do you make a democratic data policy in cities? After Barcelona, I've been hired by the United Nations to lead their smart city framework. So we managed to federate 100 cities globally, and we launched the kind of human-centered smart city project that was launched by UN Habitat at the Global City Forum 3 years ago. And today there are 100 cities that are collaborating on these systems. And I'm at the moment working with the city of Hamburg to scale exactly some of these, let's say we call it private to public data sharing framework, data sharing agreements on mobility. So we are putting forward a model for the sharing mobility, macro mobility data in order to create data trust and the data framework for sharing data at a city scale, and then solving kind of policy, regulatory, legal issues, but also rethinking the economic models around these new sharing services. So I think the data part has been pretty successful in the work. And at policy level, as I told you before, today you have Decode and the kind of data sovereignty work that we have done in Barcelona also cited in the Data Act of the European Commission. And some of these sharing, data sharing frameworks are really based on the experimentation that we did at city scale. I think what you need to scale more is really to get the system much more solid. I mean, you need to have the technology in place. Maybe in Europe we have this problem that we are very good at regulation. I mean, we are really becoming the leaders,
also
the European leader. In Germany, you love regulation, I know. The discussion I have in Germany is all the time like, yes, we need good laws, but we need good experimentation. We need good technologies. We need to implement it. We need to get it done. And this is like this kind of tension between laws and action, let's say. How do you then become competitive? So I think we are becoming leaders in the, we are a big, let's say, digital regulatory superpower. Europe. And I think this is very important because we are setting the ground, and I think in Asia, in the US, actually they probably will copy a lot of the regulations that we're doing now. But anyway, we are an alternative to the big tech in the US and the kind of digital authoritarianism from China. I think Europe has an alternative way to regulation, but I think we need to become more competitive when it comes to build our technologies in Europe, so to have the deep tech champions in Europe to be able to grow companies here that are competitive at a global level, and then to make sure we can scale the systems for 500 million European citizens. Yeah. This is what the digitization challenge we will face in the next years. This is very important to do it here.
Yeah, and how do you create that buy-in, that commitment by the citizens in order to gain that market penetration? Because I think that's really crucial. People are lazy. They love Facebook, Google, Apple for whatever because it's so convenient. And sharing my own data, I'm not even often conscious that I'm sharing this specific data, and I switch it on the control panel, and then I forget about that. So how do you create the commitment? How do you make sure that the thresholds in being part of the process aren't too high for the citizens to feel part of the voyage, and then to share the commitment with their peers?
Yeah. So first of all, I think we have to be very clear that with the both transition that are the priorities of Europe at this moment, the green transition on one side and the digital transition on the other side, I mean, Europe is investing a couple of trillions overall in this big two transition with Next Generation EU. There are 400 billion going in digitization.
And 5 billion in Italy alone, right?
Yeah, and a lot of money in Italy alone, so we will be like the test case for a lot of those things. But I think anyway, we need a pan-European innovation ecosystem. We need to do it in Europe. We need a digital ID. I know you don't like it in Germany, but we need a strong cryptography based, so giving control back to the citizens, but we need a EU-wide digital ID with our capacity to control our data and possibly a digital Europe to do the euro, to do the payment system at a European scale, and then to have effective digital services that can also scale. For example, mobility apps, they're going to have to be working in all Europe. So we need to really kind of make the market European. But I think we have to be very careful that we need to include citizens, that they are part of it, both also in the green transition, because of course the macroeconomic instability, the price of everything skyrocketing of energy, raw materials, food, inflation, the jobs insecurity. So this situation can be pretty scary if we don't, transfer trust and if we don't bring people with us. And when it comes to the digital transformation, I think that nowadays, a lot of people are asking questions about, who is controlling my data? Is it secure? Is it trustworthy? I mean, do I really want all this advertisement, all this targeting advertisement? I mean, Surveillance Capitalism, actually a book from Shoshana Zuboff, I don't know if you read it, but one of the most important books of the digital economy. She's a friend of mine, she's a professor at Harvard, and she wrote this book, was extremely popular because people don't like to feel, controlled all the time with this massive, data that you don't know who is, what's happening with it. So the question of how do we switch to a model where we have rules, transparency, and where people can feel safer and in control of data will be absolutely critical to leap forward and to digitize more of this kind of daily services. And then I think probably a policy change in the mindset of policymakers need to understand technology much more. They need to be able to explain to citizens the impact of those technologies. But I think we also need to lead this wave for a more kind of open and transparent digital model.
I agree on the disadvantages of the current model. I agree on the policy where we need to make bigger leaps and also probably need to take on more risks. What I'm not 100% sure of whether we get the buy-in without showing an added value to the people in order to adapt that kind of technology or that app or to be part of the journey. What are your plans in order to create such a commitment or to take the citizens on the voyage with you? Are there any specific products that you are seeing? Also looking at the real estate industry, how do you catch the movement data? What are your sources and what's the benefit for the private consumer to share the data with such a ledger technology?
Yeah, so first of all, I think when it comes to sharing of data, you need to know that it's possible to share data based on rules that are very clear. So it's not just like opening the data. I mean, now today we give the data without, knowing what's happening. We just click consent and we don't know what's happening with the data. But in a data trust model, the rules can be set and clear, and then
but it's work. So I have to take half an hour to work through the whole ledger, right? Or
no,
click right, left, and so on.
No, I mean, that's the cookie directive, which hasn't been working very well, but I think it's not a problem of the legislation, it's the problem of the implementation. But you can have a system where it's very easy to share your data based on some kind of rules that are agreed, and then, yeah, you could use any kind of smart contract to fix those rules. I mean, that's not the problem. I mean, the problem is not the technology, the problems are the rules, and
it's the people, it's human nature, it's laziness.
It's laziness. But, you know, I think the advantage is economic, of course. I mean, there is an entire, I mean, we know how big is only in your sector. I mean, the prop tech market is huge. It is growing. There are a lot of investments happening. And I don't think that you can stop the trends of, you know, looking at IoT, Internet of Things, how pervasive it's becoming. If you look at AI and machine learning, robotization of, you know, all, a lot of the services, the kind of even smart, the gig economy, I mean the sharing economy and all of that, and the platform economy is growing because obviously it exploits a kind of distributed supply chains with the asset, like with the owning of intangible assets like IP and data. So this kind of platform businesses will move from one sector to the other and will be able to integrate the value chain. So there is a lot of value to be made, but I think this value can be unlocked only if, you know, there is a bigger distribution there of this value. So that's why where the value is. But like one concrete example, how you, for example, can bring citizens with you. When we were prototyping these models in Barcelona, we did a big urban planning transformation. It's called the Barcelona Superblock. This is a very important urban planning project because we kind of closed 16 districts to cars in the city centers. This is like one of the big trends that is happening in mobility, moving to a more kind of sustainable and connected mobility. And then we reclaimed the public space. So we created these blocks and we removed the cars, and then we built new shops and new, new services in the city center. And we had to measure all of this. So we needed to have access to data. We needed to measure CO2 emissions. We needed to measure the price of the land, the price of the buildings. We needed to even integrate new, percentage of how many office buildings you can build and how many should be social housing or how many should be sustainable housing. And so we needed this data to do that. And citizens, I mean, at the beginning there was a lot of resistance, but not only from citizens, from businesses, from residents, from taxi drivers, from everybody. And we had to do this massive project where we showed the benefit of having, a kind of greener city with better mobility, with an attention to the climate and the air quality. And it was very tangible how to measure the impact. So that's how we got people involved, and we got people to share the data for this project. I mean, they participated, they shared the data. We could also show how we measured the impact of the decisions that we're taking. And this is happening also with energy usage. Now with the price of energy, of course, there are a lot of communities and residents and so on that want to have more transparency in how they're consuming energy and be also much more active. So the kind of energy community concept is booming in cities. So I do see this as a very positive trend where you can actually get much more involvement from the citizen side and have an impact both on the kind of value creation level and then on the democratic aspect of what you're doing.
And did you face, because that's something that we very often see not only in Germany, but also to a very high degree here, the not in my backyards, meaning the very vocal minorities who are maybe 5-10% of the whole electorate, but who are very loud, who are being perceived by the press, and in the end are able to stop democratic decisions. So how was your experience in implementing the Superblock structure or other planning procedures in Barcelona? How did you break that resistance, or what was the key in order to show the penetration rates and finally to get decisions in order to get things done.
The key of this is concrete, tangible outcomes. So you have to show with, you have to start obviously by projects that work. So we started with neighborhoods that had, you know, more needs to have green areas, for example. So you are not just saying we remove the cars and that's it, but you're saying, for example, we do 1,000 more electric bicycles, and so we improve the kind of sharing mobility patterns in the areas where there used to be, you know, during the pandemic, cities have been a very strong laboratories because, of course, you have more empty buildings. You have to rethink public space. So you have to rethink what you do in certain public spaces. So it's not only offices. So you need to, you know, do some kind of new services. So you need to involve the local businesses in order to see what services are done. So when you do these big planning processes, then you realize that people maybe resist at the beginning because they don't find it convenient, but when they see what they can get in alternative, when they see that their life and their quality of life is improving, when they see, I mean, of course, real estate goes up, the price, because of course, if you improve it and it's greener and there is more mobility, more technology, it's
it's gentrification. So
but it brings in gentrification, so you need to keep that in control and you need to make sure it's affordable. And of course, people now, as we said before, they don't want to pay more for their housing, as they don't want to pay more for electricity and for everything else because of inflation. So exactly, but that's where you need the data, because otherwise you can't model this kind of complex policies because you don't know, you know, you have a lot of variables. But when it comes to citizens, I think the key is to have a vision, to show it this vision, to explain it, to have the data so you make it visible, you make it transparent, and you involve them in the decision-making process. And that's where we use this hybrid method of offline participation and online participation. By the way, the platform of citizen digital participation that we use in Barcelona, it is now used for the Conference of the Future of Europe by hundreds and thousands of citizens all across Europe, by the Commission, by the Parliament, by, you know, it has become a de facto alternative to Facebook in Europe. I mean, it is used by 80 cities, 20 countries around the world. So it is actually a technology that was built locally for citizen participation that has scaled up at a global level, and it has transparency, ethics, security, because cybersecurity, of course, if you put all this technology and digitization and data everywhere, one of the key questions is going to become security and the cyber attacks and the cybersecurity. So you need to develop all kinds of new skills and capabilities and be able to show the vision, involve the communities from the ground up, and also put forward new governance models for this digitization wave. But do not resist it. I mean, of course, you have to be a leader and try to find a way to unlock the value in a shared way. It's
change management of the public voice.
Yes, change management, but by bringing, I think the smart city can only start from the ground up, so can only start with communities up, yes. Exactly.
Any questions from the audience? I see some respectful nodding from you, Martina. Okay.
The citizen. So some of the stakeholders are maybe represented here, right? So you have companies, you have capital which flows in. How do you take those partners which also build the city? Yeah. So how do you take those stakeholders on that important journey you just outlined?
Yeah, obviously the system is broader, like innovation ecosystem or the ecosystem of a city is broader than just the citizens. I think when it comes to bringing the innovation, like for example, how you work with big companies and small companies together is an important part of the journey, because on one side you want to move the big players, like for example, real estate or the construction industry or even big mobility companies, and you know, in the journey of transitioning and transforming the business model when it comes to the greening and decarbonization and, for example, electric mobility or rethinking, your footprint, CO2 footprint and all of that, but also in digitizing the business model and the collaboration between startups and big companies and big corporates, both in kind of VC new funds, for example, not only at the city level, that's what I do now as a kind of main job in the Italian Innovation Fund, is really to link the academia, the deep tech, the kind of science-based innovation with the businesses, big and small, and get the startups to collaborate with the corporates, which is a big part of that. How do you align it to a city plan? I think this is very important, because if you do a lot of those innovations have an impact on the ground, and then the city exactly needs to negotiate all these processes with the big companies, with the innovators, with the citizens themselves. So it's kind of triple helix approach. So it's the public sector, the private sector, the academia, and the citizen, maybe quadruple helix. You need to have the citizens on board. But the incentives is always, I think, for me, very important when you are in the innovation curve is, for example, using innovation sandboxes for regulatory experimentation. For example, how do you innovate on data governance? You don't just regulate top-down and say, well, this is how it's going to work. You need to do a kind of smart regulation. So you need to anticipate change. You do it through a testing where the big companies, the small companies and the cities are all there, then you learn from the experiments, and then regulation can come out of that. And I think this is a process that's really working, for example, with data sharing agreements. Like, how do you regulate by experimenting, bringing the stakeholders on board, which are both the companies and the small companies. Of course, when it comes, for example, regulation with Uber or Airbnb, the big platform companies, sometimes very tough. I can tell you that, you see big strikes when you don't like the kind of Uber, for example, Uberization of transportation. In cities, we have dealt with very strong kind of regulatory, I wouldn't call them fight, but very strong processes of regulation.
Airbnb in Barcelona.
With Airbnb, massive, and we had a strong, push from the citizens, because obviously they saw that the Airbnb business model was affecting the affordable housing model actually that the city wanted to put forward. In that case, it was very interesting how we integrated data in the regulation, because at the beginning Airbnb was absolutely against any transparency of the data. They just said, well, scrap our website. And of course, this is not the type of data you want. So we had to integrate the data and the access to transparency in the algorithms and the data in the vertical regulation. And this is something is happening more and more. In some cities, they even banded the possibility for these companies to operate on a specific city if they had data sharing. In order for you, the algorithm there is the business model, and it affects the prices of the renting, and people are starting to understand this more and more. So how do you do this kind of regulation process for me, and then how do you innovate on top is really an interesting thing.
So you forced Airbnb to open basically the engine for you, or the database for you?
We forced Airbnb to open some of the data for us.
The part that was not IP protected.
But it helped a lot that other cities joined, because we were not alone, and the US cities were pretty advanced as well in this process, and so we had a network of cities that was asking for the metadata actually also to be accessible, to be more transparent. And I think it's possible to do that by protecting the IP of the company, because of course that's not, we want to be able to protect the business on one side, but at the same time to have more accountability and transparency over those algorithmic systems that are affecting pricing, that are affecting the business models, and then that are affecting the regulatory landscape as well.
Thank you. Stephanie.
When you look at the competition between cities, which city do you see is already in a very good position in terms of being innovative and then attractive for younger people and for talents?
This attracting for talents is very important. There is a big fight of attracting talents in the city. For me, there is not one city and not one model, and this is not. It is really important to see the benefits of different, models. I think when it comes to innovation in Germany, I think, for example, Hamburg and Munich. Hamburg being one very good example of innovative city, because, well, when it comes to data, they have an amazing infrastructure. I mean, they really built an urban operating system. They have transparency built into regulation. They have a lot of startups. They have capacity to grow, and they can advance. They have a big digital twin project. They have one of the most advanced together with Munich and Leipzig, another city in Germany. So they can show, I think, what innovation can be. I think in Germany you are much more, let's say, a bit resistant to change sometimes, so you're very cautious at implementing. But you know, I'm a big fan of Germany having to lead this digitization wave, because if Germany doesn't lead, the entire Europe won't become a leader in digitization. So I think it's very important that cities do their part, because you know, they can show there is benefit for the stakeholders, all of them, not only the citizens, and then it can be scaled at a national level, because it's not going to happen federal level top down. So it's very important that this happens. But I think more generally, the Nordic cities, of course, I have to say, like Stockholm is doing great things. Finland, I mean, Helsinki is really pioneering a wave of innovation. Barcelona, I mean, of course, considered one of the models when it comes to mobility data and a lot of other innovation things. And of course, the C40 network, you can see, if you're interested in the net zero movement, in how cities are, you know, decarbonizing and moving to the circular economy and the concrete projects, then you can see the C40 networks. Many cities are doing that. But we need to understand, I mean, we need to keep also the global landscape much more. I think Europe needs to work more with African cities, Latin American cities, to lead also globally, because you know there are those technology. First of all, technology transfer is very important, but also in the global south you have very different problems. So you will do like a different approach, but we can learn a lot of things from the global south as well. So we need to keep this global framework open. Yeah.
However, I'm gauging from your answer that transparency of the data of the city, which is high in the Nordics, in Sweden, in Finland, as well as in Spain. We also have a very transparent data model team in Spain or in the Czech Republic. All of them are way more transparent than Germany. So basically we need to tackle the regulation topic first in order to generate scale, right?
Yes, I think not only you need to regulate and have the regulation in place. I think the regulation is now in place in Europe. We are at the point where we have very good laws, actually. I'm pretty positive about that. But we need to innovate. So we need to use this regulation as a level playing field. We need to, to use it to create the next wave of innovation, where we can be more competitive, because it's based on our principles, on our rules, of course, democratic European values, but it's also innovative and can compete at a technology and scientific level. So we need to move to the next level of creating services that can scale, creating our technology champions, and make it work for the citizens, for the public interest. So I think we need to move to the next stage, now that we have the regulation in place. So Germany should be leading the digital and the green transformation in Europe. Yes,
I think we've been hearing that.
We all need, but now, I mean, you need to, show in a very difficult moment, those kind of changes help us to show an imagination for the future, where we're going, because otherwise, again, it's like fear and mistrust and lack of trust, but also we do risk a new wave of populism if we don't show that we can lead these two transitions, the digital and the green, again, I think.
And I think that is a very good arc to the very first presentation we've seen today by Professor Schularik, who was also basically encouraging Germany to take on the more European role. He was talking about the resilience space the whole European Union for the German economy instead of focusing too much on China. So looking at it from both sides, I think there remains a lot of work to do. Thank you very much for taking the time and coming over, Francesca.
Yeah,
it was a great
you.
pleasure to be
Thank
here. You all now invited to join us for a get-together for the barbecue. I hope you'll join us too. We asked for the Frankfurt weather not to rain, so any concerns about that should be, without reason. And please join us in having a beer and a steak and whatever the barbecue will give us. Thank you very much.